Hi everybody and welcome to my new course, a masterclass in tech house and how to get that extra 10% that all the labels want. A lot of you will know me through house music, but I've been producing tech house for almost 15-20 years now. I used to be a part of Pirate Copy. We had records on all the big tech house labels. I created One Kid, so I had records with like Proc and Fitch and other people on labels like Tool Room. I've also had lots of cool little records on labels like Area Remote, Elro, Circus and many more. You can check them out on Beatport. But I've been producing it and mixing down for clients for 15 years. And I'm going to show you everything that I've learned. I made this tune many years ago and I've had the lead and the vocal on my computer. I've been wanting to do something for a while. And I thought it was about time to do another One Kid record. In this course, what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to take your track from just being building blocks to being the kind of track that has that extra 10% squeezed out of it that the professionals like myself do. There's nothing worse than when people send me the tracks to mix and I can see it's just blocks building up and taking away most of the time. That's not interesting enough nowadays. You've got to be really on the ball, and that's what this course is about. And this is really a masterclass in a journey in your music. It's a masterclass in that extra 10% that makes it feel like your track's moving all the time, because so many tracks are static today. Now, before we get into this, I want to let you know that this is the end of the 10-week mentorship that I do for people with Subtone Music Academy. And at this point, we've taught them everything they need to know for starting record production, for mixing and all the tools that you need. And this is where they've got to put it all together and add the extra 10%. If you're interested in the one-to-one mentorship, you can contact me at subtonemusicacademy.com. All the information's there. If you sign up for the taster plan, we've got lots of free videos like this and some samples of this kind of stuff for the course that backs up the one-to-one. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe. It's really going to help me. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this. I'm going to be giving this project away for free at subtonemusicacademy.com once it's released. But for now, it's here as a tutorial. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's have a listen to the track. I can't play the whole track, and the reason for that is that it's not been released and it's going to get signed and they might not want us to do that. But let's have a listen. And while we're listening, you can look at the project and look at all the different parts and look how it's just not building blocks going up and down all the time. So this is how I produce my tracks. I always start with the lead, and I call that lead one. In this case, it might be the vocal, and then I have lead two, which in this case might be the synth, okay? And then I'll have lead three, which in this track will be the bass and the kick and the bass. Obviously, I always put the kick in first, a kick that I like. And then I'll build my track up, and I'll put stuff in that track based upon the frequencies of all the other items above it as far as leads are concerned. So if I've got a bass with a lot of mid-range around 300 that's really good character, I'll try not to put a loop in that's hiding the punch and the dynamics of the bass. I'll try and place things as a matter of importance that I don't mess with that bass in them frequencies. Same with the kick and the sub, the sub meaning bass under 100 hertz or under 80 hertz, right? I only want the bottom of the kick and the sub of the bass under 100 hertz. I don't want anything else down there because I want that dynamics and that punch, right? And the feeling that I'm going to get in the club to be as clear and punchy as possible for the clubs. I want the transients as much as possible. That's what house music's about. We've got to keep the transients. So I'll put everything in the mix and then I'll arrange it. Once I've arranged it, then I'll add all the extra things, like the extra 10%, what we're going to talk about today. Once I've kind of got everything in, I'll then mix a track. Now, I have done some EQ, low cuts, and just fit it in, and maybe a little bit of reverb. The reason why I do this is because in the old days, many years ago, I'd like, I'd add a bit of saturation to this sound here. For example, the bass, right? And then at the end of the track, I'd think, there's something not quite right. And I'd turn off the saturation with everything playing and the kick, the transient of the kick would come through. Okay. So now what I do is I make sure that everything is in the track before I start adding saturation, before I add loads of reverb, before I add loads of delays, before I start really mixing the track. Because when I'm adding saturation and I'm adding distortion, and I'm adding reverbs and I'm adding delays, I've got to be very mindful that a small bit can be warm or glue your track together or anything else, but too much will make your track muddy, right? So you've got to add those things, right? Not just to sound good with the sound you're putting them on, but to see how that relates to everything else in the mix. And that's why we do the frequency and character recognition in the course. So when we put a reverb in, if I've got a reverb, how is that reverb reacting with the other sounds around it? How's that reverb acting with the other reverbs in the track? So if I've got a reverb on a vocal, I don't want the same reverb on the snare because I want them to be at different positions in the mix. You've got to remember when you're mixing, you're thinking, I've got 20 hertz here. I've got 20 kilohertz here, like sub white noise. You've got bottom of the kick, bass, Rhodes, piano, mid drums, you've got synths, you've got a vocal, then you've got a piano or whatever you might have, right? all in the mix, right? Then you've got hi-hats, and then you've got higher hi-hats, and then you've got white noise up at the top of there, and you've got to choose your sound so everything's got its position in the mix, okay? Because if it's not, a lot of the time, you're hiding the transients of those sounds. And in our music, we want the transients a lot of the time. Once I've gotten all my sounds, once I've arranged it, and once I've mixed it, I then go to automation and try and automate as much as possible to make the journey from the beginning of the record to the end of the record as exciting and interesting as possible. And we're going to go into that in depth as we move forward. Okay, let's start with the lead. So this is a sample, as I said. I've got the 3 variations, and all I've done on that is I've done a bit of EQ, a little bit of Echo Boy with an 1/8 delay on the right and an 1/8 dotted on the left with a ping pong. Again, you can use any of your DAW plugins for this. I've then got Space Control, which is a widening tool, and I've obviously not used it. I'm not a big fan of using widening tools, specifically on the sound. I like to do them in parallel because the center, the mid of a track is where the punch is. And specifically on festival systems and big club systems, you want that punch in them dynamics. And I find that comes from the midsection. So I do want my track wide, secondary, but I want it to punch in the center. And a lot of the time when you add a stereo widening effect, it messes with the phase of the center of it. So what I like to do is put it in parallel, as you'll see in this track, and then sit it back further in the mix. So the mid-range is always there. I've then got a Valhalla reverb, only small, 2 seconds, bit of a low cut on the 1970s. Nice reverb this. So it's a great sound. I love this sound. And the first thing that I tell people is, you know, your lead sound is the most important part to starting a track. If you want a track to be memorable, you have to have a sound that's kind of like no other. It's got lots of body, it's got lots of presence, it's memorable, and the sound and the melody, you get them right first of all, the rest of it's going to be easy for making your track. And then what I've done is I've made the track interesting by doing a few different variations. So what I did was I got that sample, I chopped it up and dropped it into the sampler like this. Just chopped it on the attacks and replayed it. From there, I just had a bit of EQ. Again, the same delay and the same reverb. So it had the same vibe throughout the track. And we're going into this already. You know, if you start with your lead, you get a killer melody, then try and do something that's an alternate, and then try and do something that adds part of the groove, you know, and then maybe just have like one hit every now and then. Try and make your track interesting. That's what this is about, okay? We don't just settle with one sound. And this is the hard bit for most people, you know, is doing that extra 10%. And this is the difference. I've got 3 different melodies, and in itself, that lead sound has a journey. A bit of automation in the break, building it up, and that's it. So let's have a listen to it in the break. So yes, so what I'm thinking is I have brought the break in there, and because the lead vocal's in, I just thought I'd filter it up or bring up the volume in the background, and then I'll reverb the vocal out. And that's the lead synth, which in this case is actually the lead 2. But these are the other variations. And this is the 3rd variation. We're now going on to the vocal. Now, I did try and make it so it was question and answers. So it was synth was playing when the vocal wasn't playing and vice versa. But I decided it sounded better with them playing together in certain parts of the track. And yeah, that was it basically. So like I said, this vocal is just a snippet out of another track. And it is from I Love You Love. And I just love this little hook bit. I've just loved it for ages. So let's have a listen to this.
Once I'm so high, once I'm so high, where deep inside my soul, stay can make once I'm so high, once I'm so high.
Actually, the chop isn't great. It's from a few years ago, but they've got oomps, but I quite like it. It sounds messed up. I've obviously put like lots of chorus on it. I've thinned it out with an EQ. Yes, I put the Juno 6 chorus from Arturia on there. Just make it a bit wider.
Once I'm so high, once I'm so high, where deep inside my soul, stay can make once I'm so high, once I'm so high, where deep inside.
So it's obviously already got chorus on it. I've decided to put a bit more on it. I've then used a reverb on it, and I wanted a different reverb to what is on everything else. And I love this plate reverb, the EMT 140 by UAD. You know, I've got 3-second reverb, so it's quite long. And I've used the B plate. And quite a lot of reverb on this for me. Made it wide. Let's have a listen to that.
Once I'm so high, once I'm so high, where deep inside my soul, stay can make once I'm so high, once I'm so high.
So I really like this reverb. It's got quite a lot of body to it. I don't like use it all the time. Sometimes it's a bit thick, but it really works on this vocal. And again, I would have done this reverb, all this in isolation is just to show you how it sounds. I would have mixed all these things and EQ'd everything and done everything with everything else playing. So I've then got the deep inside, which is a small part of the main vocal, but it's like a lead vocal in itself because it really drives the track. And that's what I'm thinking. It's like a second lead. And if you can do that, you're going to give your track more energy throughout. Let's have a listen to this.
Deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside.
On that, I've just got a delay and an echo for some reason.
Deep inside, deep inside, deep.
All right, so I've got the delay on here for the Hass effects. I'm trying to make it a bit wider. So let's have a listen to that.
Deep inside, 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 deep inside.
I've then got an echo on.
Deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside.
I then would have had a reverb, but I never used that because the echo is obviously doing enough for me in the mix. I don't put reverb on everything. Like I said before, too much saturation and too much reverb is mud. I only use it if I think it needs it. I don't put it on for the sake of putting it on. And as you see, I don't use any sends. I don't use any at all. Partly because sometimes if I've worked on track loads, I like to send off a stem mixing because I've done my own heading with my track. But because you can't send a send back to the group it's in. So I create chains, and I'm sure we're going to see that in a bit. I've then got an EQ on the end, just cutting out the rumble at the bottom end. I must have just thought there was a bit of rumble in there. And on that, I've automated the mix, or the vintage verb is on.
Deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside, deep inside.
So I've got a 3-second reverb, mix of 13, and low cut. What I've done is I've automated that up in the break just to make it a bit more interesting going into another part of the track. Let's have a quick listen to that in the track. again, it's the extra 10%. It's that journey of the automation. And I would have done this right at the end of the track. I've then got this vocal, which is dry, which I like. It's only every now and then, but it really helps the track and just gives a bit more interest at certain points. Let's have a listen to that. Again, I've got that and I've chopped it up. I've then gone to sample pack, Cashmere sample pack, and got a couple of sounds which were vocal chops, but like screams I thought would work, sat in the background. So that scream there, just EQ'd the bottom end out of it, added a delay, quite a long feedback studio tape. And then I've got this other sound here, which is meant to be a vocal, but it's not really a vocal. But I'm just trying to add things that come in every now and then. Like this has only got 3. It's only in 7 times in the track, and it's just a small hit that just sounds good. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to add to the groove with elements like this. These aren't meant to be main vocals. I've added all these to work with the melody of the percussion and the bass line. So they just give it a bit more variation throughout the track. And like I said to you before, this track is the extreme. You know, I could go even more with what I'm doing of that extra 10%. Just keep it interesting, not in your face, but sat back in the mix. So let's just talk about the vocal, okay, and the lead. This is how we're going to carry on in the track. In this track, we've got the vocal, okay, we've got the lead sound. So the vocals got 5 variations. We've got the lead sound, which has got 2 channels, but 3 variations, okay. We've then got the bass line, which is just 1, okay. But then we've got the kick and the clap, the hi-hat, and the snare. So that's 12 parts that are driving the track all the way through, okay? We've got 45 or 43 parts in this track, channels. So that means I've got 31 channels that are just adding to the interest of the track. And this is the key. The key is making your track interesting while listening to it as much as possible with every single item. And all these things, some of them are in 7 times, like that vocal stab. Some of them are in once, some are in 3 times, some of them in 5 times. And all they're doing is just making the groove feel like it's changing throughout the track. Okay, not the lead, because the lead is obviously in your face. They're just little things that when an A&R listens to track, they go, the attention to detail on that is really good. Or if you're dancing in the club and you just hear that, oof, what's that sound there? Or, oh, that's great. Or there's a drum roll in it once, or it just makes it feel more interesting and makes you want to dance to it for longer without getting bored. And that's the key. We're making music for the dance floor with Tech House. We're not making music for the radio. So I want to close my eyes. I want to be on the dance floor and I want to feel the whole journey. And if I've only got 15 parts of blocks, I'm getting bored. Now, don't get me wrong. I've just done a track. It's only got 15 parts in it. But that's the style of that record. We're doing tech house here, technical house. So we need to do that attention to detail. I think that makes people look at your production and go, wow, what a journey. I love that little thing they've done there. And I love this. That's the key to the track. You know, quirky little things, great sound, lead sound that no one's heard of, a hook that no one's heard of, you know, and these little things that make other producers, A&Rs, and the people on the dance floor go, wow, that record's amazing. This LFO tool here is just doing very little compression, okay? And I have this same LFO tool on every bus, okay? Except for the kick, right? And what it's doing, it's bouncing everything in the track, all the different reverbs, all the different loops, everything, and it's just it's just gluing them together, right? It's like putting a glue compressor on your master bus, but what this is doing is just giving it a bit of bounce, okay? And when you turn it off, you necessarily can't hear it, but you feel it that it's gone. And I do this on most tracks, right? I don't always put it on the vocals, but I do it on most tracks because, like I said, you know, the different loops, the different reverbs, different sounds, it just makes them all bounce together. And it's really important for me that you do this. Sometimes, like, this is quite heavy for vocals. Normally it would just be there, but they're all exactly the same, like this. I don't have different shapes of the compression with the LFO tool. And that's the vocals. Okay, so let's talk about the kick. Now, I would have had a different kick in there. I've obviously got 3 different ones here that I've tried. And as I said before, I'll start with a kick, and at the end of the track, I will always try and change the kick. And I might even change this kick again. But I want to go back to making the track interesting, that extra 10%. If you can see here, I've got all different colours. Okay, and that's different variations of the kick. So this pink is filtered out kick, which most of us do. Just EQ'd the bottom end out of it. I've then got yellow, which is a fill. And if you do my course, I want you to colour it different because you can see, you know, how a track is interesting. Like, you can see my track is interesting because it's not just blocks repeated. And the colours also help you think about, oh, right, you know, I can look at it and I can see that you've paid attention to detail. So I've got one kind of fill there, just a normal double kick, right? And then here, at the end of this break, I've got this fill, which really helps it go into the next part of the track. I've got kicks coming out. I've got one kick out there. I've got 2 kicks out other places. Here, I've got the same double kick for 2 kicks here in yellow. And then I take the kick out and put a kick on the offbeat. So let's have a listen to that in the track. It's just a nice little trick. You know, I felt like it needed, because the vocal came in and it made the vocal come to the front, and then, you know, the offbeat, dum dum. It just, I would have tried a few different things, and I only do that in this part of the track. I don't do it any other times. And the next thing, I've got a double kick on the one. Again, I've only got that once in the track. Just gives a bit of variation to the track. And then you can see as we go on, it's filtered. I've got full kick, I've got the double kick, I've got the blue one again in the break. And that's it. And what it does is, the kick's got its own journey. I want everything to have its own journey in this track. That's the extra 10%, you know, without overdoing it and people going, you know, you've done too much here. So that's the kick. Let's have a look what we'll put on it. So, like I said, I've tried different kicks. I'm currently using kick 3 here. I've used a preset that I've got of a kick that I stole off a D-Tron record running. So I dragged the kick in, I dragged the track in, and I re-synthesized the kick. This is what kick 3 does. It's really good. And it wasn't right for the track. So I know how to use kick when I use kick 2. So I've messed around with the pitch, messed around with the amplifier. Just let you know, when you do pull this in, you always need to redo these with this plugin, because it always comes in with volumes like that. And I find that it sounds better if you just redraw the lines, but it sounds virtually the same. And because this track, and because what else is in the track, I've messed around with the pitch of the beginning of the kick to come through a little bit more like this. And what I'll do with kick 3 is I'll find the frequency which makes that kick come through the mix the most. And then I'll go back to it and I'll go, right, is this genre appropriate? Because obviously something like this, you can change the kick drastically, which makes it work better in the mix, but then isn't a tech house kick, which is the reason why I might be questioning this kick. So that's what I do with Kick 3. It's a great plugin, but it takes a lot of mastering this plugin to get it right. But anyone who's done the course, as you know, we've created our own sample packs with great samples, and I've got, you know, I've always got a kick that will work in a track in my sample pack. Got some EQ, got quite a drastic cut there actually for me on the low end with 0 latency. It's not like me. What I'll do is, if I've got a low cut, I will listen to it to see if the low cut works on the kick. I'm not doing it for the sake of doing it, because a lot of the time doing a low cut will create a phase bump, which I don't want. Okay. And when I've got something like this, I always use minimal phase, but I'll listen first. Linear phase can cause pre-ringing, which I'm not going to go into now. It's all a part of the course, but you need to tune in to listen to it. So it creates that going into it, the transient. So if you're not hearing it, a lot of the time what I do is I isolate the low end, as I do with most things that I'm doing. And when I teach people, this is what we're doing. And I'll isolate the bottom end, and I'll turn this on and off. And I'll listen if it's done anything on and off. I like what it's done cutting the bottom end. I prefer it in linear phase in the bottom end. It's not doing anything to the attack of the kick. And I'll do this in the mix with everything else. I'll listen to see how is that interacting with the bass when I do that. And like I said, I always do this at the end of the track when I've got the bass in, and I would do it like this. So I would do it in the mix. And again, I'm listening to the transient of the kick around 50 to 100 hertz. And I'm listening to the bass and listening to how that low cut, it makes them interact with each other. And actually listen to this now. I prefer it without it, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change that to 0 latency. Yeah, in this case, I prefer it with it in the track with 0 latency. And I always look at it, and I always look at it this way, because I don't necessarily want a low cut, because it can sometimes make the volume shoot up, which is why I use linear phase to avoid that. But let's have a look what it is doing to the level. It's 12.3, turn it off. So the reason why I'm usually concerned is because a low cut can create a real phase shift, which increases the output, the numerical output, which is on the fader here, of a sound, which then means we've got less headroom going into the limiter. And I'm always mixing for loudness. But in this case, in 0 latency, and where I think it sounds best, this is actually making it 0.2 dB quieter, which is great for me. Let's see what happens to this meter when we go to 0 to linear phase. We're making music for the clubs, okay? And the transients are king in this kind of music. I want the kick and the bass. I want to feel it here in the club, right? That's what it's all about. And if you've got a track which is a bit muddy in the bottom end and hasn't got that punch, and you play it on a big festival system, it doesn't hit as hard. You know, transients are the most important thing. And that's why I'm very careful about everything that I put into a mix, okay? And that's why I do the mixing at the end with the saturation, with the compression, with reverbs, with delays, with everything else, because everything you add into the mix is masking a transient at some point. So you've got to decide, you know, whether it's beneficial to the mix or damaging the mix. And please remember, I don't do the same thing every time. Every track is different. Every time I use a low cut, it's different. Every time I use saturation or a reverb or a delay, it's different because the items that you're putting those things on are different. And the other items in the track are different, and how they interact is different. So don't just do what so many people do where they go, oh, right, a decapitator sounds good on a kick, right? Or this sounds good on bass, or this sounds good on drums. Don't do that. Find things that you like and just check to see if they are doing some good. Whilst we're on that, I'm going to go into something which everyone who does my mentorship knows. It's called level fucking match. What that means is every single plugin you put on, try and level match it to perceived loudness. That means it sounds the same volume on and off, because there's nothing worse. People come to me, specifically OTT plugin, right? They put it on, and what you're doing here is it sounds better. It's bringing the mid-range through. And then what happens is it's just louder. Anything that is louder sounds better, right? Anything sounds better louder. So what I do is I level match it, okay? And then I go, right, what's it doing now? And they go, I don't know. I say, well, tune into what's happening to the bottom of the sound, the mid of the sound, you know, frequencies of the sound, the top frequencies of the sound, the attack of the sound, the body of the sound, the tail of the sound, and the tone of the sound. Then they're realizing all they're doing is they're taking all the body out of the sound because they're over compressing it a lot of the time. So always level match, and them questions that we were just talking about there are part of the frequency and character recognition course. So you've always got to know, you know, what something is doing to a sound, and always know that if something's louder, it always sounds better. Okay, I've also taken some of the top end out of the kick because I thought it was popping through a little bit too much. Now, just take note here. I don't do loads of boosts. I try to EQ as subtractively as possible. I like to take the crap out. And even though you're level matching, you're turning it back up. I just find that a lot of the time, you know, I like to work negatively when it comes to mixing, and positively with big wide boosts when it comes to mastering. And I'm usually mastering my tracks that I've mixed. So I generally won't need to go into detail with mud or stuff like that because I've addressed it on each individual item. And then on the kick bus, I've got the oscillator. And this is a Oscilloscope Megascope by Schultz Audio. It's really good. Okay, so what happens is when you put one of these on each channel, it creates one of these. So you can color it. And obviously the kick red relates to my kick, bass yellow relates to my bass. And if you press this down here, overlaid, it shows you what items are the loudest in the mix. Keynote, the oscilloscope works pre-fader. So it has to be on a channel where the fade is at 0 and there's nothing else on the channel, right? Because whatever else is on the channel will be affecting the volume. So you'll be getting a reading which is misleading you. Now, I put this on at the end, and I put this on because I mix for loudness. I always want my tracks to be as loud as possible, okay? And what that means is I want as much headroom as possible for the limiter on the master channel, or for when it goes to mastering. And what I can do is I can see the things are really sticking out of the mix once I've got my mix, yeah, and go, the limiter's going to hit that first, right? And I can work on them individual items, only them, and use saturation, compression, limiting, and clipping to reduce the crest factor or the overall volume of that sound while it sounds the same volume, right? I don't use clipping on everything, and because it adds a distortion, and I'll show you that in a second when we come to a clipper, right? And I don't want distortion in my track where I don't need it. I don't mind a little bit here or there, and sometimes I will use it creatively for that reason, okay? But the reason why I use clippers most of the time is to reduce crest factor on individual items and groups, so that when it goes to mastering, the first thing that is being hit by the mastering limiter is either the vocal in a vocal track or the kick in a tech house track. And the reason for that is, if I've reduced the crest factor of the kick as much as possible, when the limiter comes to that on the mastering chain, it's not going to have any work to do. You know, because as soon as the limiter starts working is as soon as it starts distorting. So if I've got a clap really cutting through the mix that's too loud, yeah, and I've got a hi-hat that's cutting through the mix that's too loud, and I don't address them individually, when the limiter starts hitting them, they're probably going to start distorting most likely before the limiter gets to the kick. And the kick is generally the loudest thing in the track. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and get them reduced as much as possible, you know, in the mix on the individual items. And we'll go into that very shortly. I do mixing for loudness as part of the course, and it's quite in depth, and that's not what this course is about. But that's a generalization of why I use the oscilloscope and why I mix for loudness. So for here, you can see that the kick is the loudest thing in the track. But let's have a look. We'll come back to it later on when we get a clipper, and we'll see what the clipper's done. So I know that I've not flatlined my kick. I've not done too much, because this might be going for mastering somewhere else. And I know that an analog master engineer that I use can get the more out of the kick than I can get out of the kick, right, without it distorting. So I will generally saturate or clip a kick to get the most out of it, but in this case I might have tried it and decided not to do that. And as you can see, nothing is louder than the kick, so the mastering limiter is going to hit the kick first, which is what I want generally. So if you do have a bus and you do have like compression and EQ and saturation or whatever on the bus, create a bus within a bus, and on the outside bus or group, put the oscilloscope. Okay, so that's the kick. Okay, let's look at the bass. So this was one bass at the beginning, and then I've separated it into two parts. The top bass, which is more of a synth, and the sub bass. And the reason why I did that is because it was quite a busy melody. And I thought that in the bottom end, it was a bit too fast. I couldn't really feel it. And when you go to a club, it kind of just merges into one a little bit sometimes when the bass is so low in the sub. So I separated the top from the bottom, and I do this quite regular, and I kept the top of the bass stereo and kept the sub of the bass in mono because I really like that punch in the bottom end, as I've said. So let's have a look at that, the top bass. So this was originally the top bass. I've taken a couple of notes out. Kind of offbeat, kind of works, but these notes were a little bit too busy at the time. I've since muted these two notes. So when you've got a bass, like I said, sub bass, and they're both really fast, I find that you don't, from a sub point of view, feel it. And I find sometimes it's better that if you just keep the quick bit on the top and the more offbeat bass on the bottom, it gives the track a bit more bounce and a bit more energy. So let's have a listen to that. This is the high bass. and that is Trillion, one of my favourite plugins. Dark and Round Voyager, that's the basic preset I get to, then I just mess around with it. Brilliant plugin this. I don't use anything else for bass really, unless I'm using the Moog or the Prophet or the 303. I've EQ'd the bottom end out of it, EQ'd the right at the top. It's just doing a bit of sidechain on it. I think I must have just left this in. And then I've added Decapitator, and what I've done is I've come to the end of the mix and I thought, oh, the top of the bass isn't coming through enough. So just added a little bit of saturation. I use the A, which I really like, level matched obviously. And then let's have a listen to that. It's just helping you define the little roll that you've got in there a little bit more. I really like what that's doing. And so that is that. I did put some stereo spread on it, but I have taken that off because it was just a bit phasey. And the reverb that I've got here, that's kind of really helping it with the width of it. Yeah, I really like what that's doing. And then I've got the sub. And the sub is virtually the same, but with a few notes taken out. Just so it's not as busy, really. Let's have a listen to that. And because the notes are in C, they don't really have a lot of bass around the 50, 80 hertz kind of mark. So you're always going to be like kind of trying to add something with something like an R bass or subsynth by BX. But in this case, I had a lot of sub in the bottom end in the kick. So I didn't really need to be adding stuff to that sub because only extra energy, which is going to go towards the master limiter. And I don't really want to do that. And I can feel the bass, and it works great with the kick. It works great when I isolate it on the low end. So there was no need to add something. Okay, so what if I put on this? I've got a Pultec, just giving it a little bit more body. Again, a little bit more down the bottom end. And I could have really boosted that to give it a bit more sub, but I just didn't feel like it needed it with the relationship with the kick. Then I got Pro Q4. Yeah, it's just taking out all the top frequencies and everything under 19 hertz, and we'll go into that in a second. I've then got an LFO tool. I've then got a DBX. Let's have a listen to what that's doing. It's just tightening it up a little bit. I really like the DBX sometimes on bass. I feel like it's just a little bit fluffy on the bottom end, if that's the term. It just kind of rounds it off a little bit. I've then put that into mono. Okay, so what I've also done here is this. I have got this plugin called M-Auto Line. And what I've done with this, I've done it just to check the phase between the two. And I do this quite a lot with kick and bass. So what I'll do is I'll move the bass later in the track very slightly to see if it comes through better with phasing in relationship to the kick, or in this case, in relationship to the higher bass. And all I do is I put this plugin on and I get the delay, which is at 0, and I just move it to the point that I like. And I use my ears. Let's have a listen to that of both together. See there, I think it's got a little bit more body. And then I went to 314. Do you see how it sounds louder? That's because it must have been phasing with the other sound. And if you just do this on every bass you've got your kick, sometimes in between here and here, a lot of the time, all it's doing, you can do it on Ableton like this with track delay. So if you move it forward a little bit, all you're doing is moving it. So it's playing very slightly later, which is obviously just changing the phase relationship. And yeah, I found that one was better. And it's a simple trick to do. And I always use this plugin. I've just used it through other DAWs, so I don't use the one in Ableton because I use so many DAWs with clients. And I just found that all you have to do is move it and listen to where that is. And if you get a Metric KB up, you can if you listen in isolation, you can hear there's just a little bit more bass in there. And this is a great trick. I do this all the time. Every bass and kick, I do it in between when I do this with the bass as well, just for the phase, because there's degrees of cancellation. It's not just 180 degrees opposite that gives you a total cancellation with phase. You know, it might be 10% or 20% or 40% or 50% or 70% in between it being in phase, where there's strength and weakness to the relationship that comes through with the kick and the bass. So try and do this all the time. It's a really good tip. Let's look at the drums, or the percussion as I call it. So what I do with my tracks, I have the kick, and that goes in a kick bus or group. I have my high percussion, so hats, shakers, six rides, all the really high-end stuff. They have their own group called high perk, okay, which has the oscilloscope on. And then all the mid drums, like claps, snares, toms, fills, all the mid-range stuff go to the mid drums bus, okay? The mid drums bus and the high drums bus go to the perk bus. Sometimes I call it perk, sometimes I call it drums. And the reason why I do that is sometimes I like to add different distortion to those different elements, and I will add a different kind of distortion to the highs, to the mid-range, quite a lot of the time. So I'll go through the high percussion, and I'm going to start for the most important thing. So I'm going to start with the open hat. Just a nice open hat, a little bit of EQ at the bottom. Right, and now I've got a standard clip. So let's get an oscilloscope up. So I'm looking at the green. What's this doing when I'm turning this off? Actually not doing much to it. So I don't necessarily need that. But at one point, the hat was much louder in this track and I've turned it down. I know that for definite. So what I've done there, I've just left the clipper on by mistake. So I'll listen to it and see if it's making a difference now. And it's not making a difference, so I'm going to turn it off, okay? Like I said, I know that hi-hat was louder, so it was making a difference earlier on. But what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to show you using K-clip what you're adding. Isolate it. So the way I work when I'm clipping, I'm using my ears, I'm listening specifically with hard clipping, and listen to the transient and what it's doing. And I can hear it's taken away from the transient. So what I'll do then is I'll pull it back. A-B on and off. Okay, and I'll use my ears to what I think's right. So what's that doing? Okay, well, first of all, it's adding distortion. This is delta mode. It's adding that distortion in your mix. So if you've got a clipper on 10 different things, you can have 10 different lots of distortion. And the distortion sounds different whether you're hard clipping or soft clipping. I generally hard clip from the top, the more transient things, and soft clip, saturate from the bottom. But if you've got all them different bits of distortion in your track to your mix, and I turn off all the clippers at the same time, generally your track will sound much better, right? And how it sounds is more important than you personally trying to squeeze the life out of your track by clipping everything. Firstly, I didn't need this clipper here, right? Because the hi-hat probably wasn't going to hit the mastering limiter. And I'm guessing that the hi-hat was much louder before, and I've just turned the volume down. And when I've done that, I've then not turned the clipper off. In this case, I'm going to leave the clipper off. I don't want any digital distortion. I don't want that. Sometimes the distortion really helps the track. And if this was getting rid of 2 dB of sound, okay, individually on this item, which is what it was doing, it was reducing the volume by 2 dB, okay, and that hi-hat was coming, you know, lower than the kick, then I would have kept that on. But I'm always listening to the distortion. Another thing that I would do is this. Let's just say, I'll push it a little bit more. I would put it on, I get metric AB, and I check the different frequencies to listen to it on and off with the distortion, so I can zone in and isolate the areas, because to see if I can hear that distortion. Because you really need to train your ears to be able to hear this kind of distortion, because clipping is a great tool and I love it. But too much, you know, it just sounds bad. And a lot of the time, if your track's going for mastering, leave them to get your track loud. Okay, so let's listen to it on and off. So I'll just do it in the high frequencies. See, in this case, that distortion is actually adding something you might like to it. You know, let's listen to the mid-range. It's very slight, but it's adding, you know, if you're in isolation, possibly then that distortion is adding a bit of body to that hi-hat, which is why you can use a bit of hard clipping on something like a hi-hat. But in this case, I'm not going to use it. And then instead of using isolation, try turning it off, and try teaching yourself, tune into that distortion, you know, isolate it, but do it with everything playing in the track. Can you hear it? Could you hear it come in then? Because I could. It's only very slight. And don't forget, I have really pushed it, so for the example's sake. We don't want all that stuff in. It's just, again, anything you're adding in is affecting your transients. In this case, it was kind of okay with a little less on if we needed it, but we don't need it. So let's delete those two. So, first of all, I'm happy with the mix. I'm happy with all the levels and the track. And now I'm going to use my eyes, and I can see with what I see that I'm also happy, right? I can see a couple of these bits of percussion of the mid drums quite high. So maybe I might look at those in the track, okay? But I'm looking at it now and I'm going, it's pretty good really. So what I might do is just not put any clipping on this track, yeah, unless I want to get a certain character out of something, and leave the mastering engineer to do his work on it. Now, if this was my track, and this is my track, yeah, and I was mixing and mastering it for myself, then what I would do, I would probably go into the kick and see about saturating it and trying to reduce the crest factor on that sound right now. But I can see there's not a lot to be distorted there besides the kick, you know, and the top of the hat. So I'm not too bothered by it. And if you're watching this because you're just learning, then don't clip unless you have to. And before you put the clipper on, try reducing the volume of the sound, you know, and see if that works better. Okay, that's the open hat. I've then got a closed hat. Let's listen to that in the mix. And I like that because it's got a bit of a mid-range in it that when it's playing with the open hat, it gives it a bit of body. And that's why I've chosen that hat. Remember what we spoke about? I've chosen the hat for the position in the mix, frequency-wise. And then when it comes to the break and I drop out the open hat, it's got a lot of body and it's still got quite a bit of top here. And again, you know, my hi-hats aren't just blocks as such. They kind of are a little bit, but they do swap and change. I've got 16s. Again, just taking out all the low end, and I've used the same LFO shape, but to extreme on that. And everything's got its position in the mix. You can hear it all. I've got the ride that comes in there. Again, it's just a frequency. It's not really in my face. It's not too loud, but it just picks the track up a little bit more. I've also got the tambourine that comes in. Just add something to the fast groove. And as you can see, at some points, I've only got the tambourine in. At some points, I've got the 16s in. At some points, I've got them in together, but they're not generally the same all the time. I'm swapping them in and out so that the hi-hats have got their own journey. So let's listen to the tambourine come in. And again, I've introduced the ride there, which lifts it up, but I've also taken other things out of the track. I've taken it out of the main melody. So instead of adding all in with the lead sound, I've lifted it up with the ride when the lead sound comes out, instead of just doing blocks, building blocks. And when you've got the lead, you've got everything in. It's a journey. Everything's a journey. And I've automated these back to the extra 10%. I go through every item and I automate in what I can so that it feels like it's building and evolving all the time. These are just volume, you know, because I don't need the tambourine to be that loud at the beginning. I need it to be a bit louder when everything else is in, and then I can take it out. Same with the open hat, you know. And then all I've done here, and I was just doing this because I was showing one of my clients as an example, I just added a hat with a bit of reverb. Once in the track, it just adds to the journey. No one can really notice, but it does do something. So let's have a listen to that. You can hear when it comes out, but what I've done is I've just really got the top end and I've put it on a bit of reverb. Let's have a listen to that in isolation. And the reason why I've got that in there was because if you go down to the effects bus, I've got some white noise being sidechained, and when it came out, it was quite a drastic kind of step. So I added that in, which was slightly different, but just felt like it was accentuating the closed hat a little bit more. You know, these are the attention to details that you've got to be doing on every single track, even if it's just once in the track. Do it, have a look at it. Have you really created a journey with every single sound where possible? Not every sound needs a journey. The closed hat didn't necessarily need automating all the time. Don't overdo it. But just think about the journey, about what you can do to make it more interesting. And does this open hat need to be as loud in the intro as what it is in the chorus? And then on the high percussion, I've got nothing. Just the oscilloscope. Then I've got the mid drums. And again, it's the same format, you know, bringing things in and out, different combinations at different times. So the clap is the main sound here. What have I got on the clap? Just got a snare that works in my track. Again, I changed this last minute because the clap I had was getting a bit lost, and this cut through the mix a little bit more. Just taking out the rumble of the bottom end, a bit of reverb on it, and standard clip. I have clipped that quite heavily, right? And the reason why I've done that will be, let's have a look. Yeah, it's really making a difference to it. It's really reducing it. I don't know why the clap isn't on the kick there, but the kick, if the kick and the clap are together, they're going to be the loudest part of the track. You add the bass on there, that's the bit that's going to be hitting the limiter. So I'm more concentrating on the things that are on that are hitting at the same time as the kick when it comes to clipping. Yeah, it's like a bit of a delay there for some reason, but the clap is on the kick. So I really want to reduce it as much as possible. That's very weird because it's not in time. But as you can see, you know, it was making a big difference, and that's why I did it. And again, I knew it was on the kick. I knew that was the loudest part of the track, and I knew that I really needed to reduce the crest factor on that. And I don't mind the sound of it. I quite like the sound. I would rather not have that extra distortion in there, but it's not sticking out of me when I turn it on and off in the mix. So that's a snare. I'll rename this because obviously you're going to download this project. And then I've got a clap, and it's a bit of a fill. It's not all the time. Just keeping it a bit more exciting to the groove. And it's a 707, so it cuts through the mix. I like the 707. It's got hybrid reverb, and again, that was cutting through the mix. So I've clipped that, I've listened to it, I've said it's okay in the mix, and that's it. it's generally the things like the clap, the snares, the things where the transients really cut through the mix, where I use clipping a lot. Soft clipping I'll use on the kick and the bottom end, maybe the bass. But that's a whole nother course, as I said. So this is where you're going to see most of my clipping. So this is the groove snare. Just a sample out of my sample pack. It's rolled off the bottom end, rolled off the top end. There's a lot of top end in the track already that I don't really want it interacting with. And I've got a reverb on it. And I used a hybrid reverb here. And I'm using Drums for Rooms. Just one of the convolution reverbs. I do have my own convolution reverbs, which are samples from all the classic boxes. So with a convolution reverb, what you can do is you can go to it. I've got all the lexicons, which I really like, and they've got some good ones here for drums called Snare Trash and Room for Drums, which is that one, obviously. And then I can just get them and I can drag them into here, and that's a better reverb. And I really like these. I use these all the time. So, and when I save Ableton, it'll import all the sounds and all the reverbs, so you'll have them to use. And again, that's just adding to the groove. And now the rest of the things, you can see they're not all the time. The bits and bats here and there, but let's go into them. I've got the tom. It's an 808 tom. I've got it, and it says clave, but it's a tom. And what I've done, I've just got different pitches, and I've made it work with the rest of the groove in the instruments. So again, as I said to you before, I don't write the lead to the groove. I write the groove to the lead. So all these things will be interacting, not just as the groove, but also in a melody. So the questions and answers to everything. And hopefully a lot of the time, you know, vocals and the tom rolls will be working against each other. Now, the extra 10%, I've got this. It's not in all the time. I really like it. And what I've done with this is, I did have it here. I did turn the volume down at the end, but I don't have it in anymore because of the fill. And what I did here was, in the break, just went in and said, right, what can I do here to make this a little bit different? And I've gone from this so that's a normal one. And I've done this just to make it a bit more interesting. Once in the track. And it makes a difference, and people listen to it and they can hear this. This is what you need to be doing with Tech House. Little things that some people will notice and some people won't, you know, but this is the extra 10%. When you go to a label and say, I want an extra 10%, what is it? It might be automating the reverb. It might be changing the pattern once in the track. It might be automating the volume. You might be doing something, you know, like adding a distortion on it one part, you know, putting the reverb on one clap every single eight. All these things are the key to it, to keeping your track moving and make it seem interesting. On that, I've got another reverb, which is Drums Bongo Plate. Okay, let's talk about reverbs. I want everything to have a different position in the mix. And some kids come to me, I say, why do you use the same reverb on all the drums? And they say, because I want it to feel like they're all in the same room. But the problem you've got is when you use the same reverb, a lot of the time, you know, it's just a smear of reverb. But for me, what I want things to be dynamic and punch and cut through the mix and have different places in the mix. And that's what different reverbs do. And if you're sending everything to the same reverb, it's just smearing. So let's go back to the leads. My lead one is my vocal. I've got a big 140 plate on there, that reverb, right? You know, my lead 4 might be the snare, which has got a big reverb on it. I don't want them to be the same reverb. I want the snare to go, okay? But then on the bongo roll, I don't want that to be in the same position as the snare. So I want a slightly different reverb. And what I'm doing is, I'm doing it in the mix. Like I said, I had all the reverbs at the end. I had reverbs to glue the track together, right? But I also had reverbs to give things the position, the depth in the mix. And that's why I've used a different reverb here. So that's a tom. And then I've got the fill, which is slightly different. Now this is a sample. I've converted it to a MIDI track and chopped it to how's best for me. Or I've not. What I've done is I've taken elements out and I've quantized it to work with my track a little bit more, because the swing of it was probably a bit too much for this track. I don't like things to be too quantized, but in this case, it obviously worked better. Again, it's quite in the background, this. You don't hear it all the time, really. And it is a little bit muddy in the mix, but I took it out and I thought, no, I do like it. Let's have a listen to that in the mix. Again, it's very slight at this point in the track, right? But it keeps it interesting. You know, it's not just a boring groove of a hi-hat, a loop, you know, another loop, a clap. These things are what keep it interesting. I could go to town on this. I could have another 20 tracks to keep this more interesting. Okay, and again, I've said to myself, what can I do with this fill to make it more interesting, to go the extra 10%, okay? So in this part here, I've added some reverb, and in this part, delay, sorry, and this part here I have. Very slight, but it glues it to the track. I've got it there, and what I do is towards the end, I've made this fill more often. So I've got it every 4 bars, whereas before it was like every 8, but not all the time. So it just gives a slightly different feel to the drums at the end of the track. Now you can see, I've not added this really in the rest of the track, because all that delay is doing is muddying up my track and taking away from the transients. But at the end of the track there's space for it, for me to tune into it and to hear it. And it's a nice little touch. Again, it's that extra 10%, you know. And the very last one, I put loads more on. It's back in the mix. It's not in your face all the time. And that's the key to a lot of this kind of stuff. What I forgot on that? Just got a low cut. I've EQ'd it in the mix. I would have EQ'd this in the mix, not in isolation, because I felt like I needed more of those frequencies. Nothing matters what you do to a sound in isolation. It all matters what it sounds like in the mix. So that's why I mix at the end, because all my items are into, I'm mixing or EQing that fill there in that frequency to make it cut through with everything else that's in the mix. You know, I probably wouldn't have put that EQ boost on that fill in isolation. That's why I do all this right at the end. I might, you know, do a bit of a low cut, but that'll be it generally in the mix, because the most important thing to a great mix is the sounds that you choose, you know, and we choose the sounds for the quality of the sample or the recording and how it fits in the position of the mix from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, mid, sides, left, right, forwards in the mix and backwards in the mix. That's how I choose my sounds, okay? And at the end of it, if I'm adding reverb or adding EQ or adding something else, I have to see what that boost there on that fill is doing to everything else in those frequencies. And if I do that at the beginning of the track and I've added loads of other things, that boost might be muddying a part of the track later on. I've then got a rim. I've just low cut it. I've got a bit of a delay on it. Let's have a listen to that. I would have tried standard clip, but I didn't need it. Now, I haven't got reverb on that. Have you noticed? The reason why I don't have reverb on it is because I don't need reverb, right? I do like the delay on it though, okay? So adding reverb to it, again, everything we add into the mix, the saturation, the reverb delays, is taken away possibly from our transients, yeah? Some of it's really nice, too much is mud. And we don't want that. Transients are king, remember. We want our tracks to really cut through in the club. And trust me, a track with great transients played in the club after a track with not very good transients is going to hit harder and people are going to feel it more and notice your track. I've then got a cowbell. And again, what I've done is I've got it and I've duplicated it and changed the pitch of it. So I've got different pitches throughout the track. And what I've done here is I've just EQ'd it in the mix with everything else in to what fits. I've added a echo boy. So what I did here is I added it instead of a reverb because I didn't want any more reverb in the track because I want everything to cut through. And it sounds like a reverb. And all I've done is I've gone to 16th dotted, had a long feedback, and the delay sounds like a reverb. And I liked it in the mix, and that's what I did. But I eventually, obviously, thought with everything in the mix later on that it needed a bit more reverb. And I've just used a tiny bit of the drums, room for drums, just to glue it to the track. So it doesn't need to be a separate reverb. It's just there just to kind of stop it poking through too much. I don't want everything forwards in the mix, yeah? And I want this sound to be, oh, that's a nice little touch every now and then to swap up the groove throughout the track. But I have changed the notes throughout the track. And like I've just put one there at the end just to keep it interesting. Look at it, it's different. It's just not building blocks. It's not the same throughout. And the combinations of the percussions, you know, the mid drums, the high drums, and then all the different effects keeps the groove like feels like it's never really the same throughout the track. I've then got a snare roll. Okay, so I've got a snare roll in the breaks just to build it up. I like a snare roll, it works. And okay, extra 10%, what can I do to this to make it more interesting? So what I've done is I pitched it up in this break. You can't really hear it being pitched up. I'm very mindful about it being cheesy, right? What I've done here, before the last break, I've pitched it down and it sounds really cool. I'm going to play it in the track. Again, it's attention to detail, making this track different throughout, but not too much like you've done too much. You know, I've just done it. I've got my sampler and I've got the transpose on the sampler and I've just automated that. Dead simple. But those two things on every single track are making the track come alive and make it different all the time. And an A&R, I'll listen to that and go, that's a good little move. Okay, so that's the mid drums and the high drums. And then I've got the percussion bus on there. I've got nothing. Let me just see if there's any automation on that. Nope. I've got an API. That'll just be gluing the drums, gluing them all together. I'm not even using that because it's just it's in my template. But let me have a look at it. what I would do is I would generally listen to it, listen to what it's doing. Listen to all the different items. I prefer the snare, which is the most important part of them drums, on medium. Listen to the tone. And so on and so on. Gone through them all, see which sounded best to me, and then decided, and then brought the threshold right back. I like how it's bringing the attack through, you know, and I like what it's doing to the rest of the drums with the reverbs and everything else. So then bring it back. But I'll do it in the mix. Again, I really like what that's doing. Let's have a quick look at the meter here. I really like what that's doing to the transients there. Sometimes what I would do, I would try it, and if I think it's bringing something out that I think the tracks needs, I'll then use that in parallel. But I love this plugin on drums. I've then got my LFO doing what all it does on all the buses. And then in this case, I've got Newfangled. And let's see what that's doing. Just tickling it with a bit of, you know, medium, between soft and hard clipping. I would have used soft and then gone hard and listened to it, seeing what it's doing. Again, I'm just trying to prepare, gain stage it for the master channel. But I would have been mindful. I would have been looking at the oscilloscope on the on another channel. I don't have an oscilloscope on this because I'm looking at the mids and the highs separately. There must have been a point where things were really getting above the kick in the oscilloscope, and that's why I put this on. Like I said, I'll put it on, and if I like the sound of it, and it works, and it's helping me, you know, control my crest factors of individual items or groups or everything else, then it's only going to help me get my track louder. But the sound of my track is more important than the loudness, because that distortion can really ruin your track. And I do, in my one-to-ones, what I do something where I press key, and I have a key which turns on and off all the clippers. And what I normally do is I have a key command so that every clipper and every saturator, if I press the key, then they all turn off at the same time. And don't forget, I level match every plugin. So we'll turn it on and off, and I'll listen. And then sometimes the mix just, you can hear the distortion all together. So that's a really good trick. So let me show you what you do for that, right? You get it and you go to key, and then you choose, you know, a key. So I don't know if you can see that. the squiggle there. And I press squiggle, or whatever it is. There. This little squiggle. So now that's going to turn that on and off every time I press it. And what I'll do is I'll go through the clips, go through all the things I put a clipper on. Oh, the hi-hat's not on anymore. Go to the mid drums. Like that. There. Snare. And I'll go through all of them. And then I go off. So now every time I press this key, it'll turn them all off. There you go, it's off, on. So now I'll listen in the track. And I'll turn it on and off and listen to see if I can hear it. People might argue that it's adding a little something to the drums, you know, the little bits, not too much. Quite like what it's doing, but let's listen to what it's doing in isolation, okay? Let's listen to what it's doing to the bottom end, okay? Okay, I can't hear it doing anything in the sub. Let's listen to the bass. I'm listening to the individual sounds, I'm listening to the transients and seeing if I can hear anything. I can't hear anything there. Okay, low mids. Okay, I can't hear anything there. Mids. I think it's affecting the reverb on the snare a little bit there. So yeah, so it is making a bit of a difference. And in isolation, I don't necessarily like it in that frequency, but in the mix, it's not bothering me. So this is where you've got to make a decision, is like, in the mix, can you hear it in and out? You know, because I want to mix for loudness. So if I can't hear it in the mix with everything in, not in isolation, yeah, then I'll keep it on. If I think it's damaging the mix, you know, then I will get rid of it. Let's listen to the highs, because this is generally where we're going to hear it. I mean, I'm really listening and I can hear what it's doing, okay? And if I was listening to the track in this way, I probably would take it off, but I'm going to listen to it again in the whole mix, right? Because I don't think it's making enough of a difference to want to remove that distortion. And you can argue that it's probably making the mix a little bit better, that little bit of distortion on the higher, that little bit of distortion on the clap, you know, the saturation on the group. There's nothing that's bothering me now. And this is how, if you're just starting to learn how to clip, try and listen to it. You know, I've used standard clip because I can tune into the distortion that it creates, but use K-clip because you've got delta mode and tune into what you've added to the sound and then try and listen to it in the mix. The whole mix, or isolate it in different frequencies like I do here with Metric KB. So that's the drums, and that's the saturation, and that's the clipping. And again, I've added little bits just to reduce the energy that's going into the master limiter so that I can get the track louder, or the mastering engineer can get the track louder. Too many people mess up when it comes to clipping. They just destroy the sounds. And when I do what I've just done then, after we've level matched everything, they go, oh yeah. And a good master engineer will be able to get your track loud without you doing all this if you've mixed your track properly. Okay, so that's the drums. I've not put these two together. Oh yes, I've got all drums, but I've got nothing on all drums. So sometimes I might try a bit. I've probably tried a bit of compression. Don't need any EQ. I've not thought to myself, oh, I need to do this. Okay. I will have tried some compression on those drums. I don't like to compress the kick. I like the kick to be as untouched as possible so it really cuts through the mix. Don't like to saturate it too much. I don't like to do anything to it. Maybe just EQ and shape it a little bit, because I don't want to affect it in any single way. I'd rather just choose a great kick as opposed to do lots of things to it. You've got to remember that most samples that we're using as electronic music producers have been compressed, they've been clipped, they've been saturated. You know, generally, I choose my samples, yeah, for the high quality, and they don't need a lot of stuff. So don't compress things, don't EQ things, don't saturate things unless you think, oh, I need to saturate those sounds. So that's all the drums. Now we've just got the effects. Now, I just want you to look at the effects, okay? And I'm going to run through them. I've got 12 different effects. I've got this white noise. I'm automating the volume. You can't hear that in the track, but when you take it out, it conflicts with the energy. And like I said, I'm bringing this in and out with other parts. It's working in conjunction with other parts of the high drums and things that are in the same frequencies. I've then got, let me just play it one by one. I've then got this that's in 7 times in the track. I've got a crystallizer on it with a crazy effect. Again, I've automated the volume here. I don't want it as loud as I want it everywhere else. And I've automated it here. Automate everything. I've then got, just comes through the mix every now and then. Working with the groove. Don't forget, these sounds are a part of the groove. The kick, the bass, the high drums, the mid drums, the melody that they're all making together. These things are a melody and making me dance as part of the groove. That's in 6 times. This sounds in twice. This sounds in 4 times. Again, that's just an atmospheric thing that just adds a little something to the track. There's no organisation to these. I've just added them when I thought I might need them. That's in 4 times. This is in 3 times. And again, I've already got a sound that's very similar to that, but it's not the same. attention to detail. Just go to town. People come to me, we've got 4 sets of effects and they're all the same effects, right? Just copy and pasted. Stop doing that. And then I've got this one here. This is in twice. This one that's in once. I've got this one that's in once. Got a siren which is sat really back in the mix. Things that have to be forward, just adding a little, so, oh, that's nice there, and that's nice there. Some of the things really cut through, like this white noise stab up here, because they're adding to the groove. I really want them to make my body move. Some of them are for the groove, to add to it, not just make it different, but, that loud hit really makes my body move a little bit more. It's like when a drummer, with a groove, it's like a dum-dum-da, dum-dum-da. When I hit the snare hard, my body's moving to that snare more. It's the same with tech house and dancing. You've got to make your drums, make your body move. And that's one of the reasons why the Martinez Brothers tracks are amazing. I love the remix they did, the Zoo remix. And the drums on that are fantastic. They just make your body want to groove. Tech house is the same. Try not to use too many loops because they just kill the dynamics of the groove. Different volumes, different sounds. Think about how are these making my body move? Not just the drums, not just the hi-hats, also the effects and the white noise as well. Everything is what's making your body groove a little bit more. I've got this one in once. I've got this one in once, twice. And what they're doing is they are making this track interesting, and they're not in my face all the time. Let's listen to this section of the track again and try and tune into the different hi-hats and the different rolls and the fills and the clav. There's a clav that comes in every now and then, which we've not gone through. It's just a clav. It's quite dry if I remember correctly. Oh no, I've added a reverb onto it. Again, it's just adding to the groove. When it comes to my melody of the groove and all the sounds together, I want to be able to sing that pattern together with the bass line. This is what I was talking about before when I say always start with the lead. All these different items, all these different tuned percussions in conjunction with the kick and the bass line are making a melody in my head. And I'm choosing the pitch of each of these sounds, vocal stabs, claves, rims, everything else, so that when I'm listening to them drums and that bass, I've got a melody in my head, right? And it feels better. And there's not a weird note that's making my body subconsciously go, I don't quite like that. And that's a problem that lots of people have. They just chuck in loops and not listening to the tuning of certain things, which subconsciously are making you feel, I don't really like that. Unless you want that, sometimes you want things to feel a bit awkward. But in this track, I didn't want it to. I wanted the tuning of the rim work with the tuning of the tom, working with the melody of the bass line, working with the melody of the white noise, working with then the tuning of the fill, which is then working with the offbeat clav, which really gives me a kind of jerking feeling on the offbeat. Everything's working together, not just for the melody of them, but the tune of them together that can kind of hopefully sing it back. So let's listen to that section. Try and tune into all those different things. Okay, so that's everything. Let's have a look on the master. Okay, So, Pro Q3, I've reduced the volume of everything in the break, so when the drop comes in, it feels like it's lifting a little bit more. I do this all the time. Be very mindful if you've got a lot of plugins that the plugin, delay can take off the transient of the kick on the one, so you have to listen in for that. Yeah, I just want it to feel like it's lifting up. A lot of people, and you can see it in the waveform, they have lots of snares and build-ups, and then when the drop comes in, the drop doesn't hit. And that's because they've added all this stuff in the build-up, right? You can reduce the volume very slightly in the breakdown, so that energy is there. But when the drop comes, it just lifts a little bit. For me, it's a vibe killer when you have this massive build-up, and then the drop comes in, and it drops, and the energy just isn't the same. It's so important. I've done that in the track. I've then used an Endless Smile just in this little bit. I thought it worked. You know, Endless Smile, I'm not a massive fan of it all the time. And as you can see, I've automated all the different reverbs. I've automated the volumes. I've automated different things in the track. So I don't need to cop out and use an endless reverb all the time to give me that journey. You know who I'm talking about. Okay, so what I've also done here is this. I've reduced the stereo width of the whole mix just before like the drops or the choruses or whatever it might be. It's a little trick I don't do it all the time. If you're listening to stereo now, listen to it. It goes in, but listen to the drop, how wide it goes. Again, it's not something that's massively heard by people. But when you're listening in your headphones or something else, it just pops. We want that drop to feel as big as possible, and this is a little trick to it. What happened is everything in my studio, everything went dead to the center, and then when it kicked in, that synth hit that's on the one went dead wide. I'm going to go back to these synths, okay? So we've got the music, we've done the 3 variations of, and then I've added these disco stabs. Every now and then, as part of the groove. Listen to how they work with the groove. That's it, now listen to the track. Very subtle there in the mix, but you can hear them more here. Really good, just a little touch. Again, low in the mix in the background. And then I've got this about 4 times, this house stab. And again, with that, I've just EQ'd the bottom end out, put a micro shift on it to make it wide. And then what I've done is I obviously thought it needed a bit more distortion on it, so I put Saturn on it, but it was a bit too much distortion. So what I did was I just added distortion to the transient. So what I did there was I used a multi-band saturator. These are turned off. So just this section here, I found the section I wanted to add a bit more to help it cut through the mix. I've then used an envelope generator. I found the distortion that I really like, but then I thought it was going on for too long, but I liked how it made it cut through the mix a little bit more. So I used an envelope generator and I put it on the mix, okay? And what I did was, so if you go in Saturn, you go add envelope generator, and I've reduced it, so I've got really fast attack, taken the release down, and got the decay to where I thought it was working the best. And what happens is that generator, as soon as it hits straight away, and then turns it off. That's the mix, and I put that on the mix. So if you watch the mix now, you'll see as it plays the stab, this mix will go up really quickly, but the mix won't be up all the way through the sound. There's obviously a bit of a delay between the visual and the sounds, but you can see the light go up really quickly and come down, okay? I'm going to play it, I'm going to turn it on and off. There's quite a substantial difference. And in the mix, because all that matters is what it sounds like in a mix. Off. On. I've just thought it's helped it come through the mix. I've got everything in the track, and then I've gone, that needs to come through a little bit more just on the transient. And that's a nice little trick for doing it. In Ableton, you can do this loads with all the MIDI effects, but I like Saturn. I like that distortion there. It wanted a heavy saturation. So again, these aren't lead sounds. These are working with the drums and other parts of the track. And they're not all the time. So if we go back through the project, right, and we look at it now, from what we've learned today, yeah, and we look at all the different items, and we look at the automation on the master, you can, using your eyes, you can see that this track is constantly changing, okay? It's constantly moving. It's constantly keeping you interested, you know, with automation, with different sounds, with different variations of sounds, with all kinds of stuff, you know, and then going all the way through from the bass to the variation on the tom, to the variation on the lead, to these disco stabs, to these house stabs, to the vocal variations. We can see it's not just building blocks, which what most people do when they send me a track. And again, these effects, all doing it, all making this track really interesting. Okay, so the first thing I've done is just put in there the pre-master. And I've just mastered it on the track. There's plenty of space for me to do that. When it comes to CPU, it seems to be working okay. So on the master, I've got a FabFilter Pro Q4. That's not doing anything besides a bit of gain with the output, as we saw before. Then tried the Unisum mastering compressor, and I've been trying this out recently. It's amazing. It sounds fantastic. It's a compressor by George Massenberg, who did the GML compressor, which was used massively by all the top professionals. But I just thought I'd try it out, and it sounds great. Let's have a listen to it on and off. I really like what this is doing to the track. It's slamming it, but it doesn't sound like it's breaking up. I like how it's bringing the track together, and it's controlling the kind of the high bass, low mids, and it seems to feel like it could be slightly wider on the top end. Let's have a listen to that in isolation. It feels like it's tightening up the bottom end, but it don't feel like it's taking away the bass of the bottom end like a lot of compressors where they just kill the bottom end. I really like that, you know, and I generally don't use more than 1 dB compression on the master. This is slamming it. I just pushed it to see what I could get out of it. This is the first time I've tried it. it seems to be doing quite a bit in this area between 10 and 250 hertz. So just listen to the top of the bass. Like when it's in the track, it's like it just gets hold of the bottom end and just tightens it all up really well in a way that makes it a bit more punchy, which I really like, without killing, you know, the real low end of the track. Yeah, I really like what it does to the bottom end. Let's listen to the low mids. That's between 250 and 800. Again, it seems to have just tightened it up. It's amazing. I love it. Mids. I mean, it does seem to bring them forward a little bit. A bit of a volume rise in that area there, but in a good way. I love it. Let's listen to the highs. I love what it's doing. Like I said, I've just got this plugin. I've got it on demo mode. Let's listen to it on and off again in the mix. Just listen to the kick and the bass. I really like what that's doing. It just really good, really good. I think what it's doing is, I've not properly looked into it. What I do when I get plugins, I just get all the different parameters and mess around them and listen to what they do and then find what's best for me. So I've not mastered this yet, but it sounds amazing. I think it's expanding as well as compressing on the RMS. I think I've not looked into it too properly, but I just thought I'd try it because I saw somebody else talking about it, and I love it because I've really pushed it and I just love what it's doing. Now, it's amazing and I love it, and I'm going to buy it. It's $600. Yeah, $600. And it just does something that I don't hear from anything else. And I love what it's done to the bottom end. And like I said, I've just been playing around with it today and I'm going to use it. I think it's fantastic. I can really push it. In fact, let's have a look here what it's doing to the crest factor here. So after 16 bars, it's 15.6. Let's turn it off. And down there it's minus 11. So it's taken 4 dB off the crest factor, which is the difference between the peak and the RMS. I think that I need to spend a bit more time on this to really get to know it. But there's no compressors that I can push like that that's reduced the crest factor as much, which I know about. If you do, please let me know in the comments. Am I going to buy it? Oh, I haven't got $600, but right now, George, if you're watching, educational discount possibly, I don't know. It's amazing. It's a really good plugin, and I look forward to spending a bit more time on it. So yeah, that's the Dynamics by Massenburg Design Works. Love it. So next we've got the Tone Project's Michelangelo EQ, which is like a saturation EQ type thing. It's amazing. It's really nice. I quite often, and I did try the Chandler Curve Bender, which I really like as well. And this is a preset called Master Artisan Analog, which I really like. And then I just tweaked everything to suit me. And yeah, prefer the pentode in this one. Wanted the low end punch boost a bit more in the mid range, and then little cut in the mids actually, but it sounds really, really good. So I guess that's why it's let the top of the bass through a little bit. And then the rest, it was just a preset. So then I've changed the high pass from, I think it was -30 to -17. That's what sounded best for me. Turned it off, didn't sound like it was making any problems having it on, so I left it. I just took it to 17. And then, yeah, let's have a listen to it on and off. You can hear the bass coming through a little bit more, and the top end just seems to be a little bit wider. Just concentrate on that. Yeah, that just seems to be opening up the track. I really like it. And as I said before, I'm not a massive fan of stereo spread on the master, but that's really nice. I've then got Endless Smile that we saw before. I've got the Utility, which is just doing the going to mono bit on the master bus. I tried Inflator, I didn't like it. I've then got K-Clip. Okay, let's have a listen to what the K-Clip is doing. Doesn't sound like it's doing much, to be quite honest with you. I can't really hear anything there, but let's listen to the Delta. That actually doesn't sound too bad. Like I said, I'm just hard clipping here, and you know, those digital clips, I'm going to tune into them in the track to see if I can hear them and see if I can push it a little bit more, if not. So let's listen to it throughout the frequencies. I mean, I could probably push that a little bit more. Sounds good. Let's listen to the mids. I can hear it in the reverb a little bit every now and then. It's just tickling the top of it, getting the odd peaks that are coming through. Let's listen to the low mids. Fine. It sounds like the kick's possibly getting a little bit more body, but maybe that's just the plugin. I'm not hearing anything detrimental. Let's listen to the mix. I think I prefer the kick in crisp mode. So yes, that's K-Clip 3. And if you're slamming clippers on your master, which loads of people seem to be doing when they come in for mix downs, just try and tune in and train your ears over and over again to listen for what it's doing. And this is a really good way of doing it, is listening in delta mode, tune into the frequencies, not just the high bits that it's adding, but the bottom. No, I prefer it in smooth. So that's K-Clip. Okay, let's see what that's doing to the master. So it's saving about 2 dB before we go into the ozone. And it's just clipping transients that are coming through. You can hear it very slightly, but you know, it's not enough for me to be worrying about. Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds really good. Again, if I wasn't going for the 8s LUFS, I probably would back that off. Again, less distortion. Let's have a look at the Gullfoss. So the Gullfoss is an amazing plugin. It's just magic. And what it does is it kind of gives the track clarity. It kind of gives it a bit of definition and recovers sounds that are hidden in the mix, I think is what it says. Also tame sounds that he thinks are too loud in the mix. So you've got recover and tame. You've got bias, and you can brighten it or boost it. But these are the two main things that I use, and it is a little bit like Soothe, and it is a little bit like clarity actually in ozone, and I did try clarity in ozone, and I tried this and I preferred this. It does kind of win the battle at most times, this. But yeah, it's amazing. Let's have a listen to it on and off. Just seems to be opening the track up a little bit. It's amazing what it does. I love it. So yes, that's the Gullfoss. Now let's have a look at the ozone and what that's doing. So on here, I've got the exciter in the mid-range, triode, 3.8%, and that's in the mids only. So I'll just give it a bit more definition and punch in the middle. And I've not got the mix up full, I've got on 66%. I think that sounds better. Yeah, I really like that. It's really good. And then I've got Maximizer. So let's listen to that. So I've put the gain match on, and I found that this character sounded best to me. The IRC, I always find there's less distortion that comes out of it using this. I usually flip through them. I do use True Peak. Soft clip, yeah, this is what I push this quite hard. I'd probably take it down a little bit if I wasn't bothered about loudness. And we'll listen to that on and off in a second. And then transient emphasis always helps. And then we've got the stereo independence. I always find that not limiting them the same makes it sound like a bit more open, the mix. And sometimes the right side is louder than the left-hand side. It does want to be limited differently. I don't want things to be limited hard on this side when they don't need to be, just because it's that side. And I just listen with my ears and move backwards and forwards. I mean, we're not like bands where we've got a guitar panned left and that panned right. A lot of things are central for us. And I just use my ears. Let's have a listen to this on and off. And then let's listen to what it's adding or what it's doing. That's not too bad, to be quite honest with you. I might be able to push this a little bit more. Let's have a listen to it again. That's not annoying, is it? Yeah, I wish I could turn it on and off. And yeah, I think it sounds really good. Okay, let's see what we're getting volume-wise for this. I'm really happy with that. I think it sounds good. Okay, let's A/B that with the pre-master. I do wonder, I'm assuming it is, that we're hearing our mix right, but you've level matched the pre-master and that's clipping. So I wonder if that's distorting that. Probably is. But you can hear the difference. It sounds much better. Yeah, I think it sounds much better. I think it's a really good master. I've A/B'd some other tracks of the same genre. Some are much louder, but they feel a bit more closed in than mine. And I feel like mine's got a bit more dynamics. And some are lower in volume. And I'm just very mindful. I want the kick. I don't want the kick breaking up at all. And I don't want it to feel like it's frazzling at the top end. So I'm mindful of all the distortion that I'm putting in there from clippers, from the maximizer, and from all the other things that I'm putting in. What do you think? My ears are getting tired now, so I'll probably leave this on the computer, come back in the morning, make a few tweaks, and then I will send it off to a few labels, see what they think. I hope you enjoyed this course. Again, the key to it, is attention to detail at extra 10%. The things that we've learned, automate everything. Don't just build in blocks, copy and paste. Add another 30 tracks to your track that are adding little things here and there. Make sure that all your items of your percussion are creating a groove and a melody together. Okay, it does get a bit busy sometimes, this, but I'm allowing that. This track is the extreme, but is your track. You might just need an next 10, 15 tracks that keep it interesting. You might just need to change the kick up a bit more, the bass up a bit more. Keep the track interesting. Again, I'm going to give this project away at my website, which is subtonemusicacademy.com once it's been released. The one-to-one mentorship is 10 3-hour sessions. We do it on Zoom. We work in your projects. I give you homework every time, and it's a commitment. It's a lot of hard work, but the people who do my course, they change the way that they're thinking, and they're getting great sounding finished tracks, because you can't learn everything by watching this tutorial and that tutorial and doing this and doing that. And by doing one-to-one, I'm identifying where you personally have got room for improvement so you can get great sounding tracks. If you've liked this tutorial, please like, share, subscribe. It really, really helped me out. I've just got onto YouTube if this is where you're watching it. And if you want to watch more videos like this, you can also go to my website, subtonemusicacademy.com. I'll put a link below if you're watching this on YouTube. And yeah, if you like to add anything to what I've said today or critique what I've said constructively, please do. I'm working with a community of people where I'm identifying where they're going wrong. You might have a different variation or an argument to what I'm doing. You might disagree what I'm saying about clipping. You might disagree with what I'm saying about, anything in this track. Please leave comments below. Let's discuss it. There's too much hate in this community. Too many people scared of not saying something. Ask me. And please, please, please enjoy making music. That's the key to all this.